When you look back on 32 years, I can imagine you have lots of great memories. But are there a couple that stand out for you in terms of your own personal performance or recordings or just kind of favorite moments you might have with the orchestra?
Well, I think any first trombone player always looks forward to Mahler third. And I did a lot of Mahler thirds, but with only two conductors, Zubin Mehta and Esa-Pekka Salonen. And got the chance to record it with both of them. So that always is an event for a trombone player. But I do know when I peaked, and it was in April of 1982. That's when Carlo Maria Giulini was music director, and we were doing Falstaff. And it was the first time he had conducted opera in something like 15 years, because he just was fed up with the way opera companies were doing productions. And he was given carte blanche to do anything he wanted, as many rehearsals as he needed. And those performances, I think, were the pinnacle for me. And it's been all downhill since then. No, just kidding.
I think that's right around the time I heard you guys. And I remember having several recordings back in the days when you bought LPs of him conducting with, I believe you guys were on Deutsche Grammophon
Yes.
during those years. And some amazing recordings as well came out of that time period. This is just a separate issue altogether. How do you feel about the new hall that they have now?
I'm in the minority. I played there for 3 years and I didn't like it.
Okay.
The problem was where we were sitting, there was no reflective surface anywhere near us, especially behind us. It was open to this big old pit where they could lower the seats behind the orchestra into this pit if they needed more space on stage. So it was like playing outdoors. Your sound just disappeared.
Interesting.
So I was not comfortable playing there. Most of the orchestra love it, and I think the public likes it. So,
Yeah.
but I wasn't comfortable, and I don't think any of the trombones or the trumpets were really comfortable playing there.
For those who don't know, this is the Disney Concert Hall designed by Frank Gehry,
Yes.
super famous architect, and visually from the outside looks quite stunning. And it has the Gehry trademarks to it. But
I remember when it was going up and all the steel was up and it was going like this, and someone quipped, "If we ever get the big earthquake, how are we going to know if it was damaged?" I mean, it was so contorted, the inside guts of that building.
Yeah, I guess that's part of his trademark. Well, spending all those years in Los Angeles, I know it enabled you to do other work in terms of soundtracks, motion picture soundtracks, CDs and whatnot. Maybe you could talk about some of the other projects that you were involved in that you have some fond memories of.
Well, I didn't do a lot of studio work. I never hustled for it, because there's a whole group of people, that's how they make their living. And I just felt a little strange about having a Philharmonic contract and going in and sitting there and maybe taking work from someone. I never turned down anything if someone called me, but I never solicited work. But I remember a lot of famous old films, John Williams stuff, Close Encounters and Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom, and those big blockbuster films. They were a lot of fun to work on. It was great to kind of hang out with a whole different segment of the trombone community. I got to play with George Roberts and Lloyd Olliade and Dick Nash, and so it was a great experience from that point of view. But it wasn't something that I did a lot of. The other freelance work in town, there was just not enough time really to do it, and I just felt funny about doing it too.
Well, that's actually, it's great that you say that, because I think, like you're saying, there is, the highest level players in Los Angeles, as there are in New York, but the brass players in the studios in LA are second to none, and I think you're absolutely right in a very, very good way to approach it. I think that's nicely said. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your solo career. You've been active as a soloist worldwide for over 30 years now, and just a quick story that I experienced when I was in high school and wanting to go to Eastman, and I, of course, was playing on an 88H, and I picked up your Crystal Records recording, which we were trying to come up with the title of, and you had played so many great pieces on there. The Telemann always kind of struck me as, but there was a picture of you on the back of the LP in those days. And I remembered having my mom come in and try to take the picture of me with, I was trying to get the Ralph Sauer embouchure, and like I had the shirt like you, and I remember it just had such an impact on me, and my mom was like, I kept getting mad at her. I was like, no, that's not right, Well, it's still not going to sound like Ralph either, by the way, and you're not going to look like it. But anyway, that aside, you've done some great recordings, and maybe you could just talk a little bit about your approach to solo playing and how do you enjoy that type of playing, and just kind of an overview of that part of your career.
It's strange because I never wanted to be a soloist. I don't think I have the temperament to be a soloist, but I made these recordings years ago, and as a result of those, going around the world, I was invited to play. So I was a very reluctant soloist.
Okay.
But it's funny that they did open a lot of doors for me. Way back, I went to a convention in Oslo over 30 years ago as a result of this recording. They wanted to have me over. And I got an invite back about 2 years ago and saw the same people again, and they still remembered those discs, which I had totally forgotten about, really. So my solo career, there is no solo career because I never wanted to be a soloist. I just kind of got dragged into it.
Well,
I have played a few solos. I did play the Sorotsky concerto at Eastman, and that was for the U.S. premiere of that. And that would have been 1965, I think. And then I played it again in Los Angeles with Mehta, a couple of performances. And then not too long ago, I guess it was, well, it's probably 10 years ago by now, the Philharmonic commissioned a concerto by Augusta Reed Thomas that I did get a chance to premiere. So a few things, but nothing like Mr. Alessi.
Okay. Well, there is nothing like Mr. Alessi, that's for sure. But I will say, on behalf of the trombone community, we're glad you got dragged into being a reluctant soloist, because you've done some amazing work with that. And I know for me, it had a very major impact, and I think I can speak for a lot of people in that regard. Let's talk a little bit about your teaching and your reputation is stellar in that as well. I know you're currently on the faculty at the Music Academy of the West in Santa Barbara, but you've also had visiting professorships at Eastman School of Music as well as Arizona State University. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your approach to teaching, and I'd be interested if some of the Remington ideas have carried through in your approach, and just kind of a general thought on that.
Of course, I try to incorporate Remington's teaching, but I can't do it in the way he did.
Yeah.
But it's always for me, a result kind of teaching rather than a method. I try not to say, here's the method, go home and practice, and we'll hope for the best. I'd like to try different methods, different ways of doing things, even if it's a lot different than the way I personally would do it, until we hear the result. And if the result, for instance, if the legato is now perfect, I don't care that you're not doing it my way. That's the way you do it, that's your way. So I've always been result oriented rather than method oriented. I primarily, over the years, have only had some private students. I've never had a position in Los Angeles. I did have the position in Toronto and had a regular class there of students. But it was primarily people coming in for coachings and things like that, and a few people would take lessons on a longer term basis. But I've always been more of a coach rather than someone to take lessons from who would guide you from book one to the end of the line.
And we should mention that Kristian Lindbergh, one of the great trombone soloists of all time, was a student of yours. So maybe you could share thoughts about Kristian when he was doing some studying with you.
Well, he didn't need any technical assistance. It was more, we talked about interpretation and things like that, and he was already playing his an unbelievable Chardas and things like that back then, and we've maintained a nice relationship over the years, and he's now reinvented himself as a conductor and is very successful doing that in addition to his playing.
Yeah. He seems like one of those, that dynamic energy that he has, not unlike Mr. Alessi, in that whatever he chose to do, he would be a success at it. But thankfully for all of us, he chose the trombone. One of the things that I've noticed about your career, which I think is really important for young people today, and that's kind of approaching things with an entrepreneurial mindset. And that doesn't necessarily mean starting a business or doing anything, just kind of being open to things that are outside our normal way of thinking in terms of, if you want to be an orchestral player, of course you learn your excerpts, but, maybe approaching things and adding some things to your arsenal, as it were. And I've always been impressed by what you've done in your career, and I'm wondering if you could just kind of touch on a few of the ventures that you've done, but in particular, you were a member of the Summit Brass, a founding member, and that's gone on to become quite a big thing. I'd be interested in that, and also, the two orchestral excerpt discs that you released, and I'm sure you didn't start off that way, but they've become industry standards, and young players today still look to those as very important. And then lastly, you and I have this in common, but you've developed a wonderful instrument with the Shires Company and the Ralph Sauer model trombone, which for those of you who haven't tried it, it's stunning, as are all of Steve Shires' instruments. And the fact that you went into that venture, I find that a very healthy mindset in a way of approaching the music business as it is. So maybe you could just talk about those things.
Well, it was primarily a way of keeping the boredom out of the orchestral routine, that it just kept you more into things and fresher in your music making. It was usually something I just fell into. It wasn't planned. They formed Summit Brass, and they said, "Do you want to play?" Sure. And we had one rehearsal and played our first concert tour, and the rest is history. But then we started making some recordings for a company that I won't mention, who never paid any royalties, and in fact, Doc Severinsen was on the first one, and nobody ever saw a penny from that. So we decided, well, let's make our own recordings. And this was back when it was difficult to make recordings, not so easy as it is today, where anyone can make a world-class recording in their basement with the equipment that's available. So we formed our own record company, and I got involved in that and in the manufacturing of the discs, and I did all the liner notes and learned how to use a computer and PageMaker and Quark Express and Photoshop, and so it was almost like a second career of doing all that. Again, I just fell into it. Yeah. And so that lasted for quite a while, and when the airline started breaking my trombones, I decided to try to get an instrument that I could travel with, and this is when I went to Steve Shires and got the screw bell instrument perfected. And so again, I fell into that because of necessity. But I think maybe the larger point you're trying to make is that everyone, especially today, needs to be more flexible in their approach. They can't just be so focused on one aspect of music that they're going to need to do other things in music, probably out of necessity in most cases, just to make a living. While I had the luxury way back of being very focused on the orchestral career and was able to just do that, I think young players today are making a mistake because they need to be more flexible in their playing.
It's an interesting thing, because we started the interview and you were talking about the listening as you were getting ready to take the audition or taking the audition in Los Angeles. Seems to be a very similar mindset in terms of how you approach things outside of that. So that's obviously a part of your personality and your way of thinking that has served you very well over the years, I think. Well,
I mean, you try to see a need for something and you fill that need. My current project of doing lots of arranging for trombone and piano is I'm trying to fill a gap in our repertoire. We have this huge hole in the 18th, 19th century literature for trombone. We have a lot of composers who wrote for the trombone. For instance, Wagner wrote great trombone parts in his operas, but he never wrote a trombone solo. So I found these rather obscure piano pieces and turned them into trombone solos. So that's my goal now, is to fill in the repertoire that's missing for us. And I've found all these fabulous pieces. And in fact, now it's too late for me, but if I wanted to be a soloist, I would now have a repertoire that I would enjoy playing.
Well, that's great stuff, and it's good good for all of us that you're doing that. That's very cool. Let's shift gears again, and maybe I'd like to get your impression on kind of the state of the American orchestra and your feelings about it. There's so much, there's so much variance in the whole thing. I've heard it said that the three most solvent and financially successful orchestras in the United States are the Boston Symphony, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and the San Francisco Symphony. I don't know if that's completely accurate, but you know, that's based on a couple of different things. Obviously, Boston, they own all that real estate around the hall. That helps. LA, San Francisco, I'm not sure, but maybe you could talk about that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing things like the great orchestra in Minnesota having the difficulties they're having. Philadelphia's had problems recently. There's been other orchestras that are faced with a lot of challenges. And I'm just kind of getting your thoughts as you look at it, what your feeling is about the state of affairs and where you see it possibly going in the future.
Well, it was once said that the Chicago Symphony was known for its brass, and the Philadelphia Orchestra was known for its strings, and the LA Philharmonic was known for its management. And I think the problem with orchestras today is in management, mismanagement in most cases. If we could just solve that problem, I think the orchestras would become healthy again. But there's no denying that the LA Philharmonic has been well managed over the years, and they have a great income stream from the Hollywood Bowl. That whatever we used to, years ago, whatever we lost in the winter season on tours and, you know, didn't even break even, they would make back at the Bowl in the first couple of weeks and then have the surplus.
So the Philharmonic owns the Hollywood Bowl then, or
Yeah,
the?
as far as I know,
Yeah.
that they probably lease it from the county somehow, but but they make every hot dog that's sold, I think they get a.
Oh wow, that's great, fantastic. Wow, that it certainly explains a lot. That would be amazing. Revenue source.
So there's 18,000 seats there.
Yeah.
And most of the weekend concerts are full, and the regular symphony concerts. Of course, I haven't played there in 7 or 8 years now, but most of the symphony concerts on Tuesdays and Thursdays were at least half full. So they had a very good revenue stream from that.
Yeah, sure. And they've had, I mean, even when I was with the Rolling Stones, we played the Hollywood Bowl. That's an important venue for every level of act, and of course the Playboy Jazz Festival's there for years. So you can imagine like you're saying, the revenue stream. But well, do you see the orchestras surviving in the future? Obviously, I think the big orchestras in the bigger metropolitan centers will. But you know, we're talking about Rochester Philharmonic, Syracuse Symphony has changed. In my hometown, San Jose, that's become the Silicon Valley Symphony. I don't know the actual name of it now, but they're reforming and under player management, I suppose. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they're going to have to reinvent themselves somehow until we get enlightened management and boards of directors who know the value of a symphony orchestra for a city. One of the board of directors on a famous orchestra I've heard was talking with a famous conductor of that orchestra, and they were doing Tchaikovsky 6, which ends with a slow movement and quite soft. And she said, I enjoyed the symphony, but I did not like the encore. You know, that the board of directors really they had no clue about the Tchaikovsky 6th Symphony.
Right.
So unless you can stop that whole insidious thing, orchestras are in trouble until they reinvent themselves.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like educating the audience is, you know, starts right with board of directors members at times with a statement like that. Ralph, well, I really, really appreciate your time today, and I know you have a busy schedule this week with the New York Philharmonic, but as we close out today, I was wondering, and I always like to ask this because we have a lot of young viewers, and I like for them to have an opportunity to pick your brain is such a great thing for all of us. But as we close out, what if you had one piece of advice for a young man or woman out there who wants to become a great orchestral trombone player like you've done, what piece of advice would you give them? One word: listen. And all that implies. That, of course, now you have to be more flexible in your approach to the instrument and the styles of playing that you need to be familiar with. But listening is the key. Listen to the right players. Listen and don't talk so much. That was a piece of advice Gordon Pulis gave me way back. He said, keep your mouth shut and lead by example. And
I've tried to do that in most cases and had some success with it. But listening is the key.
Yeah.
Listening to yourself, listening to other people, and listening to different styles and amalgamating them into your personal approach.
That's an amazing piece of advice, and I think you've taken that to the highest order in you know, all the business things that you've been involved as you're listening. That's really what it breaks down to. So thank you for that piece of advice. And thank you, Ralph. I really appreciate, again, your time, and hope you had a great stay here in New York and in Joe's beautiful house. And we really look forward to all of your future endeavors, and we thank you once more for being with us on Bone2Pick today.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, we'll catch you next time on Bone2Pick. Thanks for being with us.